We're often taught in writing classes the value of objectivity. But when we're writing about our travels and our experiences, it's important that we cultivate our subjectivity, that is to say, our inner voice, our point of view, our perspective. This requires us to locate the I in our story, by which I mean three things. First is our role in the story, the character that we play. Are we a tour guide? Are we a confidant? Are we a partner? Are we someone who's being caught up in the turmoil of history, which relates, of course, to our voice and our posture within the story? How do we stand in position to it? Are we strong and commanding? Are we vulnerable? And finally, our relatability, and connected to this is our reliability. Are we a voice that the reader feels as though that they can trust? Do they understand our experience as being similar to theirs? Or do they feel connected to what it is that we are saying? All of these things are associated with this notion of the I, which in this case, of course, is the first person, the subjective position. Often when we talk about objectivity, we mean something sort of like omniscience, ever-presence. In other words, the perspective of the story is told from the position of someone or something that knows everything. But when we're trying to cultivate subjectivity, we want to be aware of gaps in perception. There's value in those gaps, or what I refer to as the good gaps, right? There's only so much we can perceive, there's only so much we can see or do because we're limited in our ability to be present in the world and in our stories. But those limitations have some advantages. First of all, they invite surprise. If we are omniscient, we know everything, and we're expressing it with objectivity, we're simply relating a set of facts, which is to say we know everything and we're revealing the parts of it that we think it's necessary for you to understand. But if we know that our own perception is limited, we are capable of being surprised. Something can happen to us in our stories that delights or scares or thrills or confuses us or whatever, right? There's opportunity for something unusual to happen. And from that unusual is this tendency toward suspense. In other words, if the speaking voice isn't omnipresent and omniscient, if it isn't all powerful, it's possible that something is coming that we can't predict. And our reader, our audience, will understand that. That's where suspense comes from, this sort of notion that there's something inevitably off in the distance, but we can't quite see it yet. Surprise and suspense are directly connected to each other. Which leads us to a third quality of lack of perception, which is paradox, right? Now, when we talk about paradox, what we mean is when two or more ideas sort of compete with each other and they seem to nullify each other in some way, but they both coexist, or multiple things coexist at the same time. Our brain wants to resolve that paradox. It wants to say that one of them is true and the other is not, or that they're both true but they're only true in certain contexts, or neither of them is true and some third option is actually true that we haven't discovered before. It makes our brain sort of do gymnastics, right? When we talk about things like irony, we're actually talking about paradox. When something is true at the same time that something opposing it is true, we say that it is ironic as though we're actually solving it, but really it's telling us that our brain has failed to conclude or failed to resolve the puzzle in some way. And this, of course, leads not only to things like surprise and suspense, it can make a story open up in ways that couldn't possibly be predicted, and finally, may never be resolved. Of course, in cultivating subjectivity, we need to be careful not to make the story simply about ourselves. It's told from our point of view, from our perspective, but the story should look outward, and this is particularly true in something like travel writing, where we are observing the world or we're filtering it through our perception. Now, obviously, at some level, every story told from the I point of view, it will be a story about ourselves. It's about self-discovery, self-revelation, and so on and so forth. But it is important that we're able to make a separation between those things that are self-revelatory and the larger thing that we're doing. In other words, the difference between the story and my story. It's also worth considering the limitations not only of our perceptions, which we were talking about in the last slide, but also our knowledge, our understanding, right? In other words, we should be willing in our engagement, whether in writing or in travel itself, we should be willing to engage our ignorance, to recognize what we know and what we don't know, or what we thought we knew that has somehow or other been upended by our experience, or what was revealed to us that indicates that there's so many other things that we should know. There's a kind of ripple effect that occurs when we acknowledge our ignorance or the limits of our understanding. It leads us in all different possible directions. So we may get to the end of our story only slightly more knowledgeable, but there is in the recognition of our ignorance the notion that there may be so many other things to learn. As the world opens up as we travel, it sort of echoes this idea that there's still more to see and there's still more to do, which leads us in the direction of awe, the ability to sort of stand in the presence of our subject and say, this is bigger than me. This is so much bigger than me that it sort of overwhelms me in some way, right? So we travel out into the world and we see genuinely awesome things, landscapes, symbols of human civilization, moments of cultural ceremony that we've never seen before, those sorts of things, and we're left awestruck by them. When we don't make the story entirely about ourselves, when we open ourselves up to the world and we see it through our eyes rather than simply using our eyes to look inward, we're left in the presence of this idea of something or some things far greater than ourselves.